She was beaten for every dropped plate, every step too loud, every breath not asked for. But when the quiet rancher saw the girl's bruises at the well, he said 4 words that changed everything. "You're coming with me." The slap echoed through the yard like a rifle shot. No bird stirred. No wind moved. Just that sharp crack splitting the silence and the whimper that followed. Emma staggered back, her cheek blazing red, arms trembling as she gripped the bucket she'd dropped. Water spread across the dust like a shameful confession, vanishing almost as fast as her courage. "Clumsy little wretch," spat the woman towering over her. Clara Stanton, black dress snapping in the wind, eyes colder than any frost the mountains could offer. She raised the switch again, wrist practiced, voice hard. "You spill another bucket and you'll wish I'd only used the cane." Emma didn't cry. Not anymore. She de-learned that lesson early. Tears only made the beatings last longer. She swallowed the lump in her throat, knelt to pick up the bucket, and forced herself not to flinch as Clara's boots kicked at the spilled water. Clara turned with a snort, skirts swishing behind her like storm clouds. "Fill it again," she ordered without looking back. "And this time don't you dare drag your feet." Emma waited until she was sure Clara had disappeared into the house before she moved. Her legs ached, her arms burned, and her lips still bled from last night's punishment. But she stood, because standing was all she had. She hoisted the empty bucket and made her way back to the well, steps small and careful, as though each inch of earth might betray her. The sun had risen cruel and fast that morning, blistering the ground already parched from weeks of no rain. Her bare feet danced over the sharp stones, but she made no sound. She couldn't afford to. Emma had learned to vanish into the edges of things, shadows, corners, silence. At 12 years old, she knew the language of fear better than most grown men knew scripture. The well sat at the edge of Clara's property, near the fence line that bordered the vast stretches of open land. Emma let out a shaky breath as she reached it, finally lowering her arms and setting the bucket down beside the pulley. The rope burned her hands as she worked the wheel, the old wood groaning, water sloshing below. She welcomed the strain, the scrape of the crank. It was honest pain, not cruel or petty. That's when she felt it, a presence, stillness behind her, not Clara. She would have come stomping, shouting. This was different, heavy, quiet. Emma turned slowly, hands still on the crank. And there, just beyond the fence, sat a man on horseback. He wasn't moving, just watching. His hat was pulled low, casting half his face in shadow, but what she could see was lined and sun-beaten. A coat dusted with trail dirt hung from broad shoulders, and a rifle was strapped to the side of his saddle. But he didn't reach for it. He didn't speak. Emma's heart hammered. She took a cautious step back, fingers still trembling around the crank handle. The man didn't move. Then finally he lifted a hand, not in threat, just a slow, deliberate gesture, fingers brushing the brim of his hat, a greeting, a nod. Emma didn't respond. She couldn't. She just stared, unsure whether to run or drop to her knees and beg. That's when Clara's voice rang out again from the porch. "Emma." Emma flinched. Her hand slipped, and the crank spun violently, yanking the rope and sending the bucket crashing back into the well with a splash. "Emma, get in here this instant." She turned her head just for a second. When she looked back, the man was gone. But something had shifted. She didn't know what yet, but she felt it, like the air just before a lightning strike. She dragged the bucket up again, the rope now heavier and slick. She moved faster, heart pounding, afraid Clara might come storming down again and drag her by the hair back to the house. She made it inside just in time. The door slammed behind her. That night, Emma lay curled on the straw mat behind the stove. Her arms were striped with new welts. Clara had found a muddy spot on the hem of her dress and accused her of defiance. Then she'd made her scrub the floors until her knuckles bled. Still, Emma hadn't cried, not even when the switch bit bone. She watched the flame inside the stove dance in its little grate, the only light in the dark room. Her stomach growled quietly. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Clara said hunger built obedience. From the parlor came the sound of Clara's voice, cooing sweetly to someone unseen. A visitor, maybe. One of her church friends. Women who wore lace gloves and whispered behind fans. They never looked Emma in the eye when they visited, just commented on how fortunate she was to be taken in, how charitable Clara had been. Emma didn't feel fortunate. She felt forgotten, abandoned. Outside, the wind picked up. A shutter banged once against the house, and the loose boards of the porch groaned in protest. Emma closed her eyes, praying, not for rescue, she'd given up on that long ago, but just for another day. Just one more morning where she woke up still herself. 2 days passed. The man returned. It was early morning, mist still clinging to the grass, when Emma trudged to the well again. This time her arms hurt less. Maybe she'd grown numb. Maybe the bruises had settled into her bones for good. The man was on foot this time, no horse in sight. He stood near the fence line, hat in hand, face visible now in the pale light. His beard was short but rough, his eyes a kind of blue that looked like water under ice. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her. Emma kept her head down, drawing up the water. She tried not to look, but it was like trying to ignore a fire in the night. "You all right?" His voice was deep, measured, not loud, not soft, just there. Emma didn't answer, couldn't, her throat clenched. He nodded slowly, not pressing. Then he reached into his coat and pulled something out, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He set it gently on the post at the edge of the fence. "Figured you could use it." Then he turned and walked off without another word. Emma waited until he was gone, then crept to the fence, heart pounding, hands trembling. She unwrapped the cloth. Bread, real bread, still warm. She fell to her knees. The next time he came, he spoke her name. "Emma." She looked up, startled. She hadn't told him. "How'd you know my name?" she whispered, voice barely audible. He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. "Small town," he said, hard not to hear things. She didn't know what to say. Her hands fidgeted around the bucket rope. "I seen the bruises," he said gently. Emma froze. "It ain't right." She looked around in panic, but Clara wasn't nearby. "You can't be here," Emma whispered harshly. The man just watched her, calm as stone. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "Just to tell you, if you ever need a way out, I know a road that don't come back here." Emma didn't speak, couldn't. Her throat had closed up like a fist. The man stepped back, placing something else on the post. A small tin cup, steaming slightly. "Tea," he said, "chamomile." Then he walked away again. She didn't touch the cup until long after he vanished, but she drank it, every drop. That evening, Clara found the tin cup. She didn't speak, just stared at it. Then she turned on Emma with a look that could carve stone. "Who's been talking to you?" "No one," Emma said quickly, voice shaking. Clara stepped forward. "You ungrateful little rat, after all I've done." Emma didn't run, she didn't flinch. She just stood there, waiting for the blow. It came. But this time, something inside her didn't break. It burned. And by the time she lay curled on the floor again, blood on her lip and stars in her vision, her heart was whispering something she didn't fully understand yet. Maybe there's another life. Maybe you're not meant to suffer forever. Maybe someone sees you. The morning after the worst of it, Emma didn't move for a long while. She just lay there behind the stove, curled in a trembling knot, her hair matted to her cheek where blood had dried. She didn't cry. She trained herself not to, even now. But inside something had cracked, and for once it hadn't sealed back up overnight. The smell of burning oats filled the room. Clara was up, fumbling at the stove, muttering curses under her breath as she stirred too late. Emma used the sound to roll herself quietly onto her knees. Her body screamed in protest, but she kept her jaw locked and rose. She crossed the floor with slow, practiced steps, careful not to make the boards creak, slipped past the parlor, out the back door, into the gray-blue dawn. She didn't even think about where she was going until she saw the fence line. And then there he was again. The man, same coat, same calm, except this time he was inside the fence. He was kneeling beside the well, his large hands working a twist of wire near the pulley, like he belonged there, like he'd always been there. Emma froze mid-step. He looked up slowly, eyes landing on her, and without standing he nodded once. "I asked around," he said softly. "Didn't take long. Folks don't speak too kindly of Clara Stanton." Emma didn't move. Her fingers clutched the edge of her skirt so tightly her knuckles went white. He stood now, slow and steady, not making any sudden moves. "My name's Reed Maddox," he said. "I've got a ranch west of here, quiet, room enough for someone who needs peace." She stared at him, unsure if he was real, unsure if this was another kind of trick, like the kind Clara played when she'd smile sweetly in front of guests, then tear through Emma's ribs once the door shut behind them. "I got no one left," Reed continued, "and I see your bane raised like that means you're worth less than nothing. But that ain't true, not by a long shot." Emma took a single step forward, then another. She stopped only when they were 5 feet apart, close enough to see the stubble along his jaw, the lines carved into the corners of his eyes. He looked tired, but not cruel, never cruel. "I can't just leave," she whispered. Reed tilted his head. "Why not?" "She'll find me, she always does." "No," he said, voice firmer now, "she won't." Emma flinched. Reed sighed and lowered his voice again. "I won't let her." That was when the screen door slammed behind her. Clara's boots stomped across the porch. Emma didn't dare turn. She just stared at Reed, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Clara's voice ripped through the air like rusted steel. "What do you think you're doing?" Reed didn't even flinch. He turned slowly, facing Clara squarely. "You touch this child again," he said, calm as stone, "and I'll ride to the sheriff before the blood dries. Understand me?" Clara laughed. "She's my property." Emma gasped. Reed didn't move. His gaze didn't shift. "She's a child," he said. "Not a mule, not a servant, not yours. You beat her again, and I'll bury you under the same fence you hide your lies behind." Clara's smile twisted. "You think anyone around here's gonna take your word over mine?" Reed stepped forward now, voice still even but his shoulders squared. "I think when the sheriff sees the bruises, sees the broken ribs, sees the child that won't speak above a whisper, he won't need my word." Clara's mouth opened, but she had nothing to say. She stood frozen, mouth slack, face twitching. "I'll be back," Reed said simply. "Not asking permission, just giving you the time to pack her things." He turned then, walked past Emma, and disappeared down the path toward the trees. Clara said nothing. Emma didn't dare breathe. That night was different. Clara didn't speak. She didn't scream or scold or accuse. She simply drank. She poured glass after glass of something bitter that made her face twist, and sat in the parlor staring at the cold fireplace like it owed her an apology. Emma didn't dare ask questions. She scrubbed dishes until her fingers pruned. She swept until the broom bristles bled. But no blow came, no threats, just silence. Heavy, sticky silence. She crept to bed early, back to her corner behind the stove, and stayed there, listening. Nothing. But somewhere deep in her chest, her heart beat faster. He said he'd come back. Could that be true? Would someone really do that for her? She curled tighter beneath the ragged quilt and let her mind wander for the first time in years. Reed did come back. He rode up at dawn, No pretense this time. He didn't wait at the fence, didn't knock. He rode straight to the porch, stepped off the saddle and stood tall, back straight, rifle slung but untouched. Clara was already outside. She'd been waiting. They didn't speak for a long moment. Then she lifted a small sack, Emma's things, bundled tight. She threw it at his feet. "Take her," she spat, "but don't come crying when she turns out as useless as her mother." Reed didn't respond. He picked up the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and turned. Emma stood in the doorway, her face pale, her body still. Reed held out a hand. She didn't move. "Emma," he said, voice low, "you ain't got to come, but if you stay, she'll keep breaking you till there's nothing left." Emma's throat worked, her fingers twitched. Then she stepped forward. Not fast, not dramatic, just one foot, then another. When she reached him, she didn't take his hand. She simply stood beside him. And for the first time in her life, someone put themselves between her and Clara. Without saying another word, Reed turned, lifted Emma onto his horse and climbed up behind her. They rode away as the sun began to rise. Clara didn't follow. She didn't call out. She just watched, and then went back inside. The ride to Reed's ranch was long, quiet. Emma didn't speak, neither did he. She didn't know what to say. He didn't seem to expect anything. But when the cabin came into view, modest, weathered but warm-looking, her eyes filled with something she didn't understand. Not tears. Not yet. But something close. Reed dismounted first, lifted her down without a word, opened the door. Inside smelled of pine and bread. Not much furniture, just a table, a cot, a small stove, but it was clean and calm. He set her bundle on the cot and turned to the stove, stoking the fire. "You hungry?" Emma nodded, then stopped herself, unsure if it was allowed. Reed didn't look at her when he said, "You're allowed to be hungry, and to eat." She nodded again, this time firmer. He handed her a bowl, soup, not much but warm and full. She ate slowly, glancing up every few seconds, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to grab her arm, shout, scold. But he didn't. He just drank his coffee and watched the fire. After a while he said, "You got a name besides Emma, Middle or something?" She shook her head. "All right, Emma it is." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Aren't you gonna change it?" Reed frowned. "Why would I do that?" Clara said, "Names are for people who earn M." Reed leaned forward, his voice firmer than ever. "You were born Emma, and that's good enough for anyone." Emma stared at him a long time. Then, for the first time in what felt like a century, she smiled. Just a little. That night, Reed laid out extra blankets on the cot and took the floor. Emma tried to argue, but he just shook his head. "You rest," he said. "You're safe now." Safe? She'd never believed in that word, not really. But as she lay there beneath the warm quilt, listening to the wind whistle past the eaves, she allowed herself to whisper it back. Safe. And for the first time in her memory, she fell asleep without fear. Emma woke before the sun, her eyes blinking open to a dim orange haze drifting through the frosted windowpane. For a moment she didn't move. She just lay there, cocooned in the warmth of the wool quilt, listening. No shouting, no boots thudding against floorboards, no sound of cups smashing or that dreaded cane rattling against the walls. Just the soft whisper of kindling shifting in the stove and the faint breath of the man on the floor beside her, steady and slow. She sat up quietly, unsure of the rules here. There'd always been rules before, unspoken ones, cruel ones, impossible ones. She looked around the cabin, heart thumping. It was simple. A cast iron stove, a battered table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with jars and tools and things she didn't have names for. There was a stack of chopped wood by the hearth, boots by the door, a rifle leaning against the corner. She could smell the pine logs burning, warm, real, not just for show. She pulled her legs over the edge of the cot, quilt still wrapped around her, and crept toward the stove. Reed still lay on the floor, one arm over his eyes, chest rising and falling like nothing in the world could touch him. Emma hesitated, then crouched near the stove, adding a small log the way she'd watched him do the night before. It caught quickly, crackling like applause. She backed away, careful not to wake him. But he stirred anyway, shifting with a grunt. His eyes blinked open, then settled on her. "You don't have to sneak around," he said, voice scratchy with sleep. "Ain't no bear in here." Emma stiffened. "Sorry, I just—" He waved a hand, already sitting up. "Didn't mean it like that, you're fine." She watched him rub his jaw, stretch his arms, roll his shoulders like he was shaking off a dream. Then he stood, boots scraping the floor. "You hungry?" She nodded. He moved to the shelves, pulling down a tin of oats and a pot. "You ever made porridge?" She nodded again. "Well, then today you make it." He handed her the tin, just like that. No suspicion, no lectures, no threats. Emma stared at it, her fingers barely brushing the cool metal. She moved slowly, unsure if it was a test. But as she stirred the oats into water and added a pinch of salt, Reed just pulled on his coat and stepped outside, whistling low. She stood there for a moment, porridge bubbling softly, steam rising into the morning light, and realized he had left her alone in his home. Not to test her, but because he trusted her. It felt like a weight and a gift all at once. The days passed like something out of a storybook she'd once glimpsed in a church charity bin. Each morning she helped with breakfast. Each afternoon she followed Reed out to the barn and watched him work. He never demanded, just showed her what needed doing, fixing fence posts, feeding chickens, mucking stalls. She'd never been around animals much. Clara only kept a rooster that screamed more than it crowed, but here everything felt alive. Reed had a quiet way about him. He didn't speak unless he had something to say, and when he did speak, it wasn't to fill silence. It was to teach or explain or ask. Never accuse, never mock. He let silence stretch when it needed to, and when Emma needed it most. He gave her gloves that were far too big. She wore them anyway, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers clumsy but determined. He showed her how to hold a hammer, how to check the fence line for gaps. She watched his hands, rough, calloused, steady, and mimicked each movement. The first time she got something right, hammering a nail without bending it, Reed gave a small grunt of approval. "Good hands," he said, "stronger than you think." Emma didn't respond, but she didn't stop smiling for the rest of the day. It wasn't perfect. Her nightmares still came. Some nights she'd wake up gasping, curled into the corner of the cot like a trapped animal. Reed never pried. He'd just sit by the stove until she calmed down, sometimes tossing another log on the fire, sometimes handing her a cup of warm milk without a word. One night she finally asked, "How come you live out here alone?" Reed looked up from his carving. He always had a piece of wood in his hands these days, shaping something she couldn't quite make out yet. He took a long time to answer. "Wife passed 5 winters ago." Emma nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." "She was good," he said, "kind, strong." A pause. "We tried for kids, never could." Emma felt something twist in her chest. Then sickness came through town, took her quick. After that, he shrugged. Quiet was easier. Emma looked down at her lap, fingers knotting into the blanket. "I ain't easy," she whispered. Reed didn't look surprised or offended, just thoughtful. "You don't have to be," he said. And somehow, that was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. It happened a few weeks later. Reed was in town picking up supplies. Emma stayed behind, tending the chickens and trying to mend a torn pair of gloves. She didn't see the rider until he was nearly at the porch. A man, tall, lean, slick hat and a face like sun-baked stone. His horse looked nervous. So did he, underneath all that smirking. He dismounted without tying the reins, boots clinking across the steps. "Hello, little girl," he drawled. Emma stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. "He's not here." "I can see that," the man said, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for him, Mr. Maddox. He home soon." Emma didn't answer. The man chuckled. "You've got his stubbornness already, that's cute." He stepped closer. Emma didn't move. "Tell him Hank Cooper stopped by," the man said. "Old business." Then his smile dropped. "And tell him some folks remember what he did." He tipped his hat again, turned and rode off, didn't look back. Emma didn't breathe until he vanished behind the trees. Old business, what did that mean? That night when Reed returned and she told him, he went very still. "Hank Cooper," he repeated. "You know him." Reed didn't answer right away. He set down the sack of supplies and sat heavily at the table. "Yeah," he said finally, "I know him." Emma waited. Reed looked at her then, the fire casting lines across his face that made him look older than she'd ever seen. "He's trouble," he said simply. "If he shows up again, don't speak to him. Don't open the door, just wait till I'm back." Emma nodded. But the quiet in the cabin lasted long after the fire died. Spring came in slow fits and starts. The snow melted into mud. Then the grass crept back in patches. Then the trees began to bud. And Emma began to grow. Not just taller, though she was. Not just stronger, though her arms now held buckets without strain. She began to laugh. Not often, not loud. But she laughed. Reed started teaching her to ride. His horse, Bramble, was old but patient. Emma had never sat a saddle in her life, but Reed walked beside her every step. When she finally rode in a full circle without panicking, he gave a rare full smile. "Proud of you," he said. Emma nearly burst into tears. Then one day the sheriff came. It was late afternoon. Emma had just finished mending a torn saddle strap when the knock came. Reed opened the door. Emma stayed behind him. Sheriff Mallory, round-bellied, red-nosed, hat tilted back on thinning hair. "Afternoon, Reed." "Sheriff, I got a letter, said you've taken in a girl. No formal adoption papers, no court approval." Reed's shoulders tensed. She was being beaten, locked in. I stepped in. "Doesn't change the law," the sheriff said. Emma's heart dropped. "She's safe here," Reed said. "Maybe, but the widow Stanton filed complaint." Emma stepped forward. "She hit me. She left me outside in the cold. She—" The sheriff held up a hand. "I'm not unsympathetic, child, but the law's the law. There's gonna be a hearing." "When?" "Week from now. Judge Carroll's coming through. He'll decide." Reed's jaw tightened. "And until then?" Sheriff sighed. "Until then she stays, but keep her close." Then he left. Emma looked up at Reed, panic rising in her chest. "She can take me back." "She can try," he said, "but she won't succeed." He said it like a vow. But Emma knew what Clara was capable of. And she'd seen what men like Hank Cooper could stir up. And even as the days passed, and the wind turned warm, and the flowers bloomed outside the fence line, something darker bloomed in the distance. A reckoning was coming. And this time, silence wouldn't be enough. The morning before the hearing came with thunder in the hills. Not the storm kind. The kind that sat low in the gut and rattled up through your ribs long before the sky turned. Reed felt it first. He stood on the porch, mug in hand, eyes fixed west toward the ridge where the trail vanished into pine. Emma watched him from the doorway, arms folded tight across her chest. She learned to recognize when his silence meant more than quiet. "What is it?" she asked. Reed didn't answer right away, just narrowed his eyes, Nothing yet. But they both knew better. Inside, she packed her things, not because she was leaving, but because she needed something to do with her hands. The hearing would take place in Millstone, 3 towns over. Judge Carroll only passed through every few months, and Reed had insisted they make the trip early to avoid trouble on the road. Emma tried not to think of Clara's face, of that twisted smile, of how easily she could slip between charm and cruelty. She tried not to imagine the courtroom, sawdust floors, stern men in hats, strangers deciding where she belonged. But mostly, she tried not to imagine Reed walking away if things didn't go their way. Because now, she didn't think she could bear that. They rode out before sunrise. Bramble carried the supplies. Emma sat atop a borrowed mare, smaller and gentle, with eyes like black glass and a coat the color of old milk. Reed called her Daisy, said she didn't spook easy. They rode in silence for the first hour, only the sound of hooves and wind through dry brush. Emma kept her eyes ahead, her back straight, hands tight on the reins. "You all right?" Reed asked at one point. She didn't answer at first. Then, "I don't want to go back." "You won't," he said. "You don't know that." He looked over at her. "I know what truth looks like." Emma bit her lip. "That's not always enough." "No," he admitted, "but it's where we start." They rode on. Millstone was bigger than the town she'd seen before. Rows of storefronts, 2-story saloons, a church with a bell tower that reached above the rooftops. The sound of hammers, wagons, dogs, voices, it all blurred together. People stared. Not at Reed. At her. The girl riding beside him, thin, pale, hair braided back tight like a schoolmarm's, face set like stone. They booked a room at a boarding house on the edge of town. The woman who owned it, a Miss Hartley, eyed Emma closely but said nothing, just nodded once and handed over the key. "Court-s at noon tomorrow," she said to Reed. "You best not be late." He wasn't planning on it. That night's sleep didn't come easy. Emma lay in the narrow cot beside the window, watching the moonlight slip across the ceiling. Every sound outside felt like a threat, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of tree branches, a distant horse. She turned once, twice, then sat up. She found Reed at the small table whittling again, always whittling. The figure now looked almost finished. A bird, wings outstretched, delicate and rough all at once. "You can't sleep either?" she asked. He looked up, "Not much." She moved toward him, bare feet silent on the wood floor. "Were you nervous the first time you stood before a judge?" Reed leaned back in his chair, the knife still in hand. "First time was over a land dispute," he said. "Neighbor tried to claim part of my southern field, claimed I didn't have the deed." "Did you?" "No," he said. "Lost it in a barn fire." "So you lost?" He shook his head. "I had 10 witnesses say otherwise. Sometimes truth don't come on paper." Emma nodded slowly. "Do you think she'll lie?" Reed looked at her hard. "Absolutely." Emma swallowed. "But that's why you speak first," he said. "Don't let her shape the story. You tell it plain, no frills, just truth. And if they don't believe me—" Reed's eyes softened. "I will." It wasn't a promise about the outcome. It was something deeper. She nodded. And this time sleep came. They arrived at the courthouse early. A long, single-story building with white columns and a sagging roof. Inside smelled of dust and ink. The judge was already seated when they entered. An older man, white beard trimmed, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up slowly, eyes sweeping across the room with the weariness of someone who'd seen more lies than he cared to remember. Clara was already there, dressed in full mourning black, veil draped over her hat, eyes red from what Emma knew was not crying. Beside her stood a man she didn't recognize, Hank Cooper. Reed's jaw clenched. They took their seats. Case 42B, the clerk called. Custody appeal. Widow Clara Stanton versus Mr. Reed Maddox regarding minor female Emma Lark Stanton. Emma flinched. Lark, that wasn't her name. It never was. Clara stepped forward first. She bowed her head, voice syrupy and soft. Your Honor, I took this child in after her poor mother passed. My cousin, God rest her soul. I gave Emma a home, food, a roof, schooling, and what thanks do I receive? She runs off with a stranger, claims abuse. Lies, all of it, lies. The judge eyed her coolly. You filed no paperwork proving legal guardianship. You reported no missing person. Clara smiled sweetly. We lived off the county line. Things get lost in the shuffle. Reed stood. She beat the girl, he said flatly. Whipped her, starved her, locked her outside in winter. I saw it with my own eyes. The judge raised a brow. Any witnesses? Reed shook his head. Folks don't speak up around her. Convenient, Clara said. Emma stepped forward. May I speak? The judge nodded. She looked at him, hands clenched at her sides. She's not my kin, Emma said. She told me I was a burden. She made me sleep on the floor, eat scraps, work sunup to sundown. I have scars. Can you show them? The judge asked. Emma hesitated, then rolled up her sleeve. Gasps echoed. Welts faded but deep, jagged like tree branches. One ran nearly from elbow to wrist. The judge went still. I didn't cry, Emma said softly, because I knew if I did she'd hit harder. I stopped crying a long time ago. There was silence. Even Clara didn't speak. Judge Carroll leaned back. Mr. Maddox, he said, you have a profession. Rancher. Income. Modest but steady. Are you prepared to assume full guardianship, educational, medical, and otherwise? Yes. Do you understand the permanence of this? Reed didn't blink. I do. The judge turned to Clara. Widow Stanton, based on testimony, physical evidence, and lack of documentation, I rule against your petition. Clara's mouth dropped. This is absurd. Sit down. Emma felt her knees wobble. She looked at Reed. He nodded. It was over. Not the past, but the part where she had to prove it. They left the courthouse in silence. Halfway down the steps, Emma stopped. Reed turned. You all right? She was shaking. He reached out. She didn't flinch. He put a hand on her shoulder, just held it there. You did good, he said. Emma nodded, blinking fast. Then, before she could think, she lunged forward and hugged him, arms tight around his waist, face buried in his coat. Reed didn't move at first. Then he placed a hand on her back, gently, like setting down a fragile thing. You're free now, he said. But Emma shook her head. No, she whispered. I'm home. That night they returned to the ranch. Bramble was tired, Daisy nickered softly, the porch creaked under their boots, and inside the fire had gone cold. Emma built it herself. Reed didn't stop her. She stacked the logs, lit the match, watched the flame rise. Then she turned to him. What's next? He smiled. We start again. And they did. The first spring rain came 2 nights after they returned from Millstone. It started slow, a soft tapping on the roof like footsteps too cautious to come closer. Emma sat on the porch wrapped in her blanket, knees drawn to her chest, watching droplets pool in the grooves of the wooden railing. The storm didn't bother her, not anymore. After all she'd survived, a little rain was just sky weeping, and even that felt like peace now. Reed came out without saying a word and sat beside her. He didn't ask what she was thinking. He never did. He just sat. And somehow that silence was the safest thing she'd ever known. When the thunder came, low and distant, Emma didn't flinch, but her voice broke through the hush. "Do you think people like Clara ever change?" Reed was quiet for a while. "No," he said finally, "but people like you do." She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. She was changing. She could feel it in the way her shoulders didn't hunch when someone raised their voice in town, in how her hands had steadied when fixing the corral gate that morning, in how the nightmares were coming less and less, replaced now and then by dreams she barely dared to believe in, dreams of warmth, of riding across wide fields, of laughter, of family. The rain grew heavier. Reed stood and offered his hand. She took it, let him guide her back inside, where the cabin glowed warm with firelight. And for the first time since arriving, she left her blanket behind. The days passed with new rhythm, not perfect but steady. Emma woke with the sun now, not from fear but from habit born of purpose. She had chores, responsibilities, a place that needed her hands. Reed gave her the south garden to tend. The soil was stubborn, rocky, full of thistle roots, but she attacked it like a mission. She planted rows of carrots, onions, potatoes, even corn, marking each with a little wood stake and carved name. She didn't say much while she worked, but Reed would catch her humming sometimes. Quiet tunes with no words, like she was speaking to the earth in its own forgotten language. At the barn, she began learning how to shoe a horse. Reed showed her once, then let her fumble through the second time. She cursed under her breath when the nail bent wrong, but never at herself. That, too, was new. One morning she caught sight of herself in the mirror hung beside the cabin door, a small rectangle of warped glass. She paused. Same girl. But not quite. Her hair was longer now, neater. Her skin was darkened from the sun, her arms toned. The scars remained, a lattice of old pain across her back and forearms, but she didn't shrink from them anymore. They were part of her, like her name, like the soil. That evening she stood at the sink, scrubbing dishes, and asked without turning, "Do I have to go to school?" Reed looked up from the paper he'd been reading. "You want to?" "I don't know." "Well then no, not yet." She nodded. "But you'll learn just the same," he added. "Reading, writing, numbers, I can teach those." Emma hesitated, then said, "You already have." That night he left a book on her cot, dog-eared, faded cover. "Stories from the Prairie," it said in looping script. She didn't tell him, but she read it twice by the end of the week. Trouble came back in the form of a letter. It arrived by mail one hot morning, folded crisp and clean with a seal she didn't recognize. Reed read it at the table, eyes narrowing as he scanned the lines. "What is it?" Emma asked, setting down the broom. "From the judge." Her stomach dropped. "He says there's been talk," Reed continued slowly. "That Clara's appealing the ruling, claims new evidence, wants the case reopened." Emma's fists balled at her sides. "She can't." "She can try," Reed said, "but I won't let it stand." That night the tension returned, not in the way it had once haunted them. This time it sat more like armor than dread. Emma sharpened her focus, worked harder in the field, cleaned the tack, kept her eyes sharp for movement near the woods. Reed began checking the lock on the cabin door twice before bed. He loaded the rifle more often. "I'm not scared," she said one night as they sat by the fire. "I am," he said. She turned toward him, surprised. "Not of her," he clarified, "of losing you." She swallowed. "They can't take me. They'll have to come through me first." They didn't speak again for the rest of the night, but the fire between them wasn't the only one burning. 2 days later a man arrived on the trail, not Hank Cooper, not the sheriff. This man wore a long coat with brass buttons, his boots too polished for someone local. He introduced himself with a stiff nod and a badge. "Marshal Donovan," he said, "hear about the Stanton case." Reed stepped onto the porch, arms folded. Emma stood just inside the door. Thought the matter was closed, Reed said. There's been a petition, says the child was coerced, that her story was rehearsed. By who? Marshal Donovan tilted his head. By you, apparently. Emma stepped forward, voice clear. That's a lie. Donovan looked at her. Be that as it may, I'm required to file a report. I'll be staying in town for the week, interviewing folks. Reed's jaw tensed. And if they say what Clara wants them to? That's not up to me, that's up to the court. He left without another word. That night Emma didn't sleep. Neither did Reed. Days passed like that. Quiet tension, louder than any storm. Reed rode into town each morning to speak with whoever might listen. Emma stayed behind, working the land, fixing fence lines, feeding the animals. And then one evening, he returned looking different. Not broken, but quiet, too quiet. What happened? She asked. Reed hung his hat, washed his hands at the basin. They're leaning her way, he said. Emma's heart cracked. Why? Cooper's got coin, Clara's got sympathy. They say she's an old widow trying to right her wrongs. She says I'm dangerous, that I took you to hurt her. Emma sat hard at the table, air sucked from her lungs. She's lying, she said. I know. They know too. He nodded slowly, but knowing don't always win. Emma stood. Then what do we do? Reed looked her dead in the eye. We remind them who you are. They went into town together the next day. Emma wore her best dress, still plain but clean. She kept her chin high. She walked beside Reed, not behind him. At the saloon, the mercantile, the church, they stopped, spoke to folks who knew Clara, knew Emma's story, even if they'd never dared admit it. Some looked away. Some nodded slowly. A few, only a few, spoke up. I remember when she locked that girl out in the snow, a woman whispered outside the bakery. Pretended it was punishment, but she nearly froze her half to death. At the schoolhouse, the teacher frowned. She never let Emma attend, said the girl was slow, but I saw her read once by the well, fast as anything. They gathered what voices they could. And by the end of the day, Emma's legs ached, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. They see me, she said, almost in disbelief as they rode home. Reed looked at her. They always did. No, she said. They just didn't believe they were allowed to say it. He didn't argue. Because she was right. The hearing was set for the following week. But Reed had one more stop to make. That evening, just as the sun dipped low and the cabin bathed in gold, he pulled out the wooden carving he'd been working on for months. The bird. It was finished now. He handed it to her. For strength, he said. Emma took it with reverence. It fit perfectly in her palm. Is it flying or landing? She asked softly. Neither, he said. It's choosing. And she understood. That night before bed, Emma stood at the window, carving clutched in one hand, watching the stars. She remembered pain. She remembered silence. She remembered a life where she wasn't allowed to take up space. But now she remembered something else. A man who gave her freedom. A land that didn't punish her for breathing. A name that was hers. And a future that for once didn't feel borrowed. Whatever Clara brought next, Emma was ready. The courthouse looked different the second time. Not in shape or size. It was still the same low building with whitewashed walls and creaky steps, but something in Emma had changed. The first time, she walked in like a shadow, trying to pass unseen, trying not to shake. Now she stepped through those doors with her head held steady and her hands clasped at her back, not from fear but to stop them from trembling with anger. Reed walked beside her, slow and grounded, like he always did. A man who didn't rush, didn't bluff, didn't beg. He moved like the truth was enough to hold his spine upright. They sat near the front. Clara was already there, of course, draped in black lace again, thinner than before, face pale in a way that made her look almost ghostly. But the venom in her eyes was still bright. She didn't sit alone this time. Hank Cooper leaned beside her, one arm stretched over the bench behind her shoulders like he owned the courtroom. Emma swallowed hard and looked away. The judge, a different one this time, younger and stricter, called the room to order. Appeal hearing for Case 42B petition for custody challenge. Widow Clara Stanton versus Reed Maddox. Clara stood when prompted, her veil pulled back, her voice already trembling with the weight of practiced grief. "I was wrong," she began, her voice cracking like old timber. "I didn't know how to raise a girl like Emma. I was grieving my husband, sick with loneliness. I made mistakes, but she's blood, family, and family is worth forgiveness." Reed didn't move. Emma didn't blink. Clara went on, weaving a tale of regrets and redemption, of lost cousins and promises to dying mothers. She wiped her eyes with a lace handkerchief, dabbed the corners of her mouth like she was more fragile than glass. Then Hank Cooper stood. He didn't pretend to cry. He didn't pretend to regret. "She was taken," he said flatly, "without process, without law. Mr. Maddox is known for taking justice into his own hands. Folks say he has a temper, that he don't believe in rules if they don't suit him." Emma felt Reed stiffen beside her, but he said nothing. "She deserves stability," Cooper said, "not to be raised by a man who thinks he's above the law." That was when the judge called Emma forward. She rose, every eye in the room turning as she approached the bench. Her palms itched. Her heart banged against her ribs like fists against a locked door, but her voice came steady. "She hurt me," Emma said, "every day, with words, with her hands, with silence." The judge frowned. "You have witnesses." "Some," she said, "but even if I didn't, the proof is here." She rolled up her sleeves again, showed the scars. The judge flinched, but she wasn't done. "I'm not here to punish her," she said. "I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking to be left where I'm finally safe. That's all." A pause, then she added, quieter but firm. "Reed never hurt me. He never lied. He never made me feel small." She turned, looked the judge in the eye. "I choose him." The silence was heavy. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Then the judge leaned forward. "Miss Stanton, you are how old?" 13. "And you understand that custody means guardianship until adulthood?" "I do." "And you understand it won't be easy. Ranching isn't a simple life." Emma smiled, just a little. Neither was surviving Clara. That was the end of it. The judge cleared his throat. "In light of testimony, evidence, and consistent welfare records since the initial hearing, I rule in favor of Mr. Maddox. Custody remains as is." Clara gasped. Not from surprise, no, she'd seen the weight of truth settling the moment Emma stepped forward, but from humiliation. Her mask cracked, eyes turning glassy not with tears but fury. Hank Cooper rose too fast. The judge raised a hand. "This case is closed. Any further challenge must be filed through proper legal channels. Until then, Emma remains with Mr. Maddox." Reed reached out. Emma took his hand. And they walked out of that courtroom like people who had won more than just a ruling. They won each other. Outside, the sun was high and sharp, slicing through the cool morning air like a blade of gold. Reed opened the stable door and helped Emma mount Daisy again. He didn't speak until they were past the edge of town. "You did good," he said. Emma looked at him. "You think it's really over?" He sighed. "The law says so, but some folks don't follow laws, they follow bitterness." "You mean Clara and Hank?" She nodded. "Then what do we do? We live, we don't wait for trouble." And that was exactly what they did. Weeks passed, then a month. Summer rolled in like fire. The garden thrived. Emma's hands became strong and quick. Her back no longer ached from work, it longed for it. She built a small birdhouse for the carving Reed had given her, mounting it on a fence post near the back field. One day, a bluebird took up residence there. "Guess it chose to land," Reed said with a grin. Emma just smiled. The nightmare stopped, not completely but enough. She began to laugh, real laughter, loud and full. And one evening, Reed told her a story about trying to shoe a horse backwards when he was 15, and she laughed so hard she had to sit down in the grass. "I like you better when you're quiet," she teased afterward. Reed shrugged. "Most folks do." "But I'm not most folks." He didn't reply, he just looked at her. And nodded. Then came the fire. It started in the far field, just a flicker at first, maybe from a lightning strike the night before, maybe something else. But by the time Emma smelled the smoke, it was racing through the grass like it had a purpose. She shouted for Reed. He was already grabbing buckets, calling for her to get the animals. They fought it together. The two of them soaked towels, beat down flames, dragged water from the well. For an hour they battled wind and smoke and heat. And they won. Barely. The fire burned a wide crescent into the field, destroyed a fence, singed the edge of the barn, but the cabin held. Emma collapsed near the porch, coughing into her sleeve, lungs raw from smoke. Reed sat beside her, face blackened, shirt soaked through. "You all right?" he asked, breath shallow. She nodded. "Wasn't natural," he said, looking back toward the blackened field. Emma didn't have to ask what he meant. Hank Cooper. Or Clara. Maybe both. But they didn't say it aloud. Not then. 2 days later, they found the rope nailed to the barn. A crude noose. Dangling from the beam near the tack wall. Emma stared at it for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared. Reed cut it down with one stroke. He burned it in the stove. Then he loaded his rifle. "We ride tomorrow," he said. Emma didn't ask where. But she packed her things. Again. They rode into Millstone before dawn. Straight to the sheriff's office. Reed demanded an investigation. The sheriff, Mallory again, more tired than ever, held up his hands. "You've got no proof. They're threatening a child." "You think I don't know that?" Reed leaned forward. "Then do something." Mallory sighed. "Cooper's got friends. Clara's got whispers. You go charging in without more, you'll stir up dust you can't settle." Reed stepped back. But Emma stepped forward. "Then I will," she said. Mallory blinked. "You let people like her scare the town quiet. You let folks like him buy silence with coins and curses, and you know what that does." Mallory said nothing. Emma didn't blink. "It makes cowards out of the ones who should have known better." She turned and walked out. Reed followed. That night, as they returned home, Emma stood on the porch and looked out across the field. "Are we always going to be running?" Reed shook his head. "We're not running." "Then what are we doing?" "Standing our ground." She nodded. Then said something she'd never said before. "Can I call you Pa?" Reed turned, eyes slow to lift. His voice cracked just enough to answer. "Always." The sky cracked open that night, not with rain, not with thunder, but with a stillness so heavy it made the air taste like iron. Emma lay awake, quilt drawn to her chin, listening. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Reed was in the next room, door left ajar the way he always did now, ever since she started calling him Pa. She didn't know what time it was when she finally slipped from her bed, toes brushing cold floorboards, breath tight in her chest. She padded to the window, pulled the curtain back with fingers that trembled not from fear, but from knowing. A figure stood at the edge of the field, too far to see clearly, but tall still, watching. Emma didn't scream, she didn't run. She just stared back. And then the figure turned and vanished into the trees. At first light, she told Reed. He didn't question her. He saddled the horses, loaded the rifle, tied a rope to his belt like he was preparing for a storm the sky hadn't warned them about yet. "We're going into town again," he said. "I'm done waiting for them to strike first." Emma nodded. She understood now. Sometimes safety wasn't quiet. Sometimes safety had to shout. They left Bramble and Daisy tied at the stable outside the sheriff's office. Millstone was waking up around them, shopkeepers opening shutters, boys running water buckets to the livery, a drunk being tossed from the saloon door. But none of it felt normal anymore. The town had taken sides, even if no one spoke it aloud. Some tipped their hats, some turned their backs. Emma noticed everyone. Sheriff Mallory met them on the porch. "Reed," he said, weary. "Miss Emma." "She saw someone," Reed said, "near our fence." "Could have been a ranch hand," Mallory offered, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Emma said. "He was watching, not moving, just watching." The sheriff scratched his jaw. "I'll send someone to take a look." Reed stepped forward. "No, you'll come." Mallory hesitated, then sighed. "Give me 10 minutes. The ride back was quiet. Sheriff Mallory rode behind them, rifle across his saddle, face grim. When they reached the cabin, everything looked untouched. No signs of entry, no fresh tracks, just the same familiar stillness. Until Reed found the feather. It lay on the porch rail. Not from any local bird. This one was bright white, clean, too clean, tied at the quill with a strip of red cloth. Mallory frowned. "That's some kind of message." Reed didn't answer, just handed it to him. Mallory turned it in his hand. "You ever see anything like this before?" "I've seen warnings before," Reed said. "This one's dressed up fancier, but it stinks all the same." Could be Cooper, could be someone else. Emma felt her stomach turn. Or Clara. The sheriff nodded slowly. "I'll write a report, but unless they step foot on your land, there's not much else." "They already have," Reed snapped. Emma put a hand on his arm. Mallory raised both hands. "Look, I'm not saying you're wrong, but the law's got lines. You step outside them, even with good reason, and folks like Cooper use it against you." "So what then?" Reed asked. "Wait until they come with torches." The sheriff looked down at the feather again. "Just be ready." Then he rode off. They were ready. Reed double-bolted the doors, reinforced the window frames, stacked extra firewood inside, cleaned and loaded the rifle, then showed Emma how to use it. "You ever fired one?" he asked. "No," she said. He placed it in her hands, guided her fingers, showed her how to breathe. They practiced out back, aiming at a rotten log. The first shot startled her, made her shoulders jump, but she didn't drop it. By the fourth shot, she hit the log. By the sixth, she didn't blink at the sound. That night, she kept the rifle by her cot. Just in case. The next attack wasn't fire. It was words. A note tacked to the barn door, letters carved into wood not written, deep gouges that spelled, "Stolen girl, stolen land." Emma stared at it, eyes wide. Reed said nothing. He walked back inside, grabbed his hat, and rode into town without a word. He returned hours later, jaw tight, knuckles white. "They won't listen," he said. "Said it's just boys causing mischief. Said Cooper was out of town." "Then what do we do?" Emma asked. "We make them listen." They built a sign. Big, bold, right at the edge of their fence line. Painted in white against stained wood, it read, "SHES not yours, SHES home." They planted it firm in the ground. Some neighbors passed by and stared. One or two spit in the dirt, but others nodded. One even came by with a basket of bread and left without a word. Emma clutched that basket like it was gold. Then 3 nights later came the scream. Emma sat bolt upright. Reed was already at the door, rifle in hand. Out back, the chicken coop. They rushed out, boots flying, hearts hammering. Inside the coop, feathers flew like snow, 2 birds gone, 1 crushed beneath the fence. No man, no tracks. But the smell of kerosene lingered. And on the door, burned with the end of a torch. Leave or burn. Emma stared at the message, heart pounding. Reed kicked the door open wider, looked toward the woods, the darkness beyond the field. Then he said something she'd never heard from him before. We go to the church. Millstone's church sat atop a hill, white cross gleaming even on cloudy days. Pastor Elijah met them at the doors, lantern in hand. Reed, Emma. We need help, Reed said plainly. Elijah let them inside. Over coffee and a thin slice of pie, they told him everything. The beatings, the threats, the noose, the fire, the carved message. The pastor listened. When they were done, he nodded once. I'll speak at Sunday service. Reed shook his head. We're not trying to shame her. You're not, Elijah said, but silence can't protect the guilty anymore. Emma looked at him. Do you believe us? He met her eyes. I believe truth has a way of surviving liars. She exhaled, not quite a breath of relief, but something close. Sunday came, and the town filled the pews. Emma hadn't stepped foot in a church since her mother's funeral. She'd half expected the walls to shake when she entered, but instead they held strong. Elijah took the pulpit, and he told the story. Inside was a baby, tiny, mewling, alive. My sister, the girl whispered. Emma didn't ask questions. She opened the gate. And just like that, the cabin had more than 2 heartbeats again. Winter came early that year, the wind harsher, the snow heavier, but inside the fire never died. The girl, her name was Ruth, learned to speak again. The baby, Anna, slept in a crate lined with wool, her cries softer now, soothed by the rhythm of safety. Emma became more than a sister, more than a survivor. She became what Clara had never been. Someone who knew how to listen without hurting. Who could kneel beside a child and say, I believe you. Reed built a cradle by hand. He carved birds into the side, just like the one he'd given Emma. When he finished, he set it beside the stove and said, This one's yours. Emma blinked. You mean? For your house, he said. She frowned. This is my house. He shook his head gently. You'll build your own someday. This is just the beginning. She didn't know what to say. So she nodded, and added that to the list of things she never thought she'd have. A cradle. A future. A man who believed in both. Spring thawed the land again. The garden stirred. The chickens clucked. The sun kissed the porch railings with new warmth. Emma turned 14. Ruth turned 9. Anna took her first steps across the floor, giggling as she fell into Reed's arms. They framed a photo of that moment. Pastor Elijah had gifted them a camera from a traveling photographer passing through. The photo wasn't perfect, but the smiles were real. On the back, Emma wrote, The family Clara couldn't destroy. And under it, the home we built ourselves. One day, Emma stood by the birdhouse at the fence line, now weathered and moss-covered. The original carving was gone, taken by wind or storm, but the house remained. Still standing. Still open. She looked out at the field, the same place she'd first seen Reed, the same fence she'd clung to, bleeding and shaking, unsure if she could make it another night. Now she stood tall. And someone else might come through that same trail one day, broken and hollow, not knowing yet that healing waited just over the rise. She whispered a prayer, not for safety, not anymore, but for courage, for whoever came next. Then she turned toward the cabin, where laughter spilled through the open window like sunlight. And she smiled,